Welcome back for part 3 on driving change, impact, and growth in your organization. Let's jump back in.
Right. And some organizations say, well, we're just gonna wing it. Right. But then, you said the stats about 50% of change not being successful. Winging it is not a strategy. Nor is prayer. For most people, it's not a strategy for a successful change. So we want to do a bit better than that. Oh, we got a bunch of hands here. Oh,
Donald and
I
Bob
must have said something that wasn't right or right.
pressed a button. Let's hear Donald.
Something that you touched on that I think is important to emphasize on this change thing or any communication of anything new is to always explain why. If we don't explain why, the most we can hope for is blind compliance, and good luck with that. So they just think this is some new rule or something being imposed by cranky old people, my boss, and whatever. So if we explain why, in my experience, two things happen. Number one, we get much better buy-in. That there's a really important business reason for doing it this way, or for improving this, or changing that. There's a reason, and now you know the reason, and I think people identify with it better. But the other magical thing is when we explain why we're doing this because we want to get this outcome, the odd, really bright, caring person will say, aha, if that's the outcome you want, that we want, I have a few ideas on how we could do it even better. You won't get that from everyone, but you will get it from a few. And because one of my little lines is our frontline people know stuff and they hate it when we don't ask. Because when we don't ask, they think we don't care. And if we don't care, why should they?
Agreed. Great comment. Bob?
Yeah, kind of take this in a bit of a different direction. Thinking about the 10%, the CEO and the senior team, obviously in the early going, they would be aware of things that the change is going to generate that are negative. And I'm just wondering at what point in time or how do they phrase that? Because it's not all of the change that's a problem. It's just like, let's be aware that the following three things are going to be from this day forward different. And I think it's better to acknowledge them. I'm just wondering about the timing and method of bringing those things out so people don't think you don't get it.
So that's a very nuanced question, Bob. Thank you. The way I would answer it is this. You never want to be in a, certainly, I've been a CEO for most of my career. You don't want to be in the position of somebody saying, oh, I bet they're going to come up with something else. Or I bet he's hiding something. Oh, and now it's this, and now it's this. Why didn't they tell me all this up front? Right? So, if you got to say some stuff that includes some bad news, I'd rather sort of say it up front. Now, sometimes you just can't. Okay, this change will allow you to cut costs, i.e., people, by such and such, and you don't want to be broadcasting something like that. So maybe you don't. I think sometimes though the reason for making a change is not always apparent, even sometimes for senior management. I'll give you an example. Sorry, let me just answer your question with respect to timing. I think the earlier the better, right? But sometimes you just can't talk about step 3 unless you get to step 2 first. And now you're at step 0, you got to do step 1, right? So you want to do things that develop momentum for change. That's how I would answer it. Once you've got the momentum for change, certain other things that you know about, but you don't want to talk about, will become abundantly clear to everybody. And then if there's some bad news about it, you got to get ahead of the bad news from a communications perspective, right? And deal with it at that particular point. But you need to get the momentum started. Sometimes you don't know what the impact of that change will be, or you think as a leader. And I'll give you an example of this. A number of years ago, I was working with Thomas Cook Financial Services. This is about $1 billion global foreign exchange, provider. They did travel and travelers checks and everything, but that wasn't what I was doing. Okay, and I came up with this idea that they can use the internet and web browsers to be treasury terminals so that instead of people phoning up and saying, can you give me the rate for transferring 1,000,000 Deutschmarks to Japanese yen, okay, they could do that on the computer and then press a button and the transaction would go through. And we pitched this massive change to their CEO and their leadership group. And they were blown away. And the number one comment was, if we do this, we'll be able to cut our costs dramatically. We can let go of about 1,000 people. And that will make a huge, huge difference to the profitability of the organization. What I told them though was, no, the opportunity isn't that. The opportunity is now you've got 1,000 people who intimately know your products and services, who can now be working as outbound sales to make a dramatic difference to the business itself, which is what they eventually did. The light bulbs went on because sometimes change opens up opportunities that you don't realize, even as a management team, that will accrue until you've had those kinds of conversations. And then all of a sudden, in terms of the communication to the previous question, the communication about going through this change to these 1,000 people who may be thinking, gee, I'm going to be replaced by some web browser, is no, here's where the opportunity is for each of you. And all of a sudden, it's not, oh, I'm not going to lose my job. They don't like loss, to Donald Cooper's point. They see it more as an opportunity. And that's why it was successful. That's why that particular change was successful.
When I think about change and identifying, what changes need to happen, I think of the change makers, the decision makers. When I think of growing organizations, I think of changing roles and, departmental expansion. Can you talk to me about like that hierarchy within an organization, within the growing organization, and how it needs to change?
So picture this. You're running an organization, you're an entrepreneurial leader, you could be an association, whatever you are, okay? And here you are in a point of time, and you've built your systems and processes, your people, the right size for where that organization is. Meanwhile, the ground is shifting underneath you, right? There's all kinds of societal changes, economic changes, technology changes, customer member changes, whatever it is, okay? And do you think that all of your systems and processes and peoples, your culture, all that are now right size for that new environment, if you will? If your organization is a growing organization, okay, the systems and processes and people and the culture and all that stuff for a 10-person organization, is that the same as what's needed to run a 50-person organization or a 500 or a 5,000 person organization? The answer is no. No. So how do you get from point A to point B to point C to point D? Okay, there's an issue of growth, right? And the growth is that the people become stretched, the systems become stretched, the culture is stressed. Okay, it kind of reminds me of oh, it's almost embarrassing to say, but you're wearing a shirt and then you put on a lot of weight and the buttons are kind of popping a little bit. Okay, not happened with me. Okay, but you get the idea. And so you got to change the shirt. It's the same person inside. Okay, sometimes you need to change the person. Don't eat so much, right? So it's the whole thing. So how do you go about getting that change? Either the organization stays the same, but the environment has changed, or the environment's the same, and gee, the organization is growing, or if both are happening at the same time. How do we make sure that that happens, right? How do you make an impact? And so I've got an idea on that. And Donald, you're putting your hand up here, so why don't you chime in? Then I'll chime in after that.
It's a brilliant insight. I love the way your mind works. I just love watching you work. I'm in awe.
Thank you.
My insight is that if we do not have a clear vision for the future of our business, what we must become in 3 to 5 years, if we don't have that clear vision for the future, our business as we best understand it is our business as it just was. Last year is over. We've looked at the numbers. We've done the autopsy. We've made up our excuses. And the business as we best understand it is our business as it just was. And without a clear vision for the future, we then go out and hire people for the immediate past because that's the business as we best understand it. And it's a huge mistake. And that's why it's so important to have that clear commitment about what we commit to become in 3 to 5 years.
So,
Because
so
then you know who you need on the team.
first of all, Donald, I totally agree. I totally agree. But let me just debate you on a couple things here. I'm sure you're right because you were like the guru of gurus. Okay, but the Soviet Union was very, very, very well known for its 5-year plans. Okay, and it became very difficult at the very beginning. I know you got to roll it and everything like that, but the challenge is that the pace of change has become so dramatically fast that leaders, boards, senior leaders know what they know, but they don't know what they don't know. They have no idea 2 years ago about AI or the promise of AI. They had no idea about this COVID suddenly happening. They had no idea about the impact of some of the business models like Uber or Airbnb or a whole bunch of other things or SaaS. Like they had no idea. So it's a bit of a myopic challenge for leaders and their boards. And by the way, the good ones, this is not a challenge. They know how to deal with it, right? But for so many, when you've got profitable quarters, you're kind of doing good work. Okay, let's just incrementalize let's figure out where we're going to be in 3 to 5 years, or just even 3 years even, and we kind of know where we're going to be. But unfortunately, most leaders are can't see the possibility because they don't know what they don't know, either because of societal or economic changes or otherwise. I really think that this is a big challenge. So from my view, the best you can do is to say, how do we develop, for example, agile leaders, right? How do we develop the planning processes so that what you're saying can actually happen? How do we make sure that we build management teams and frontline people who are used to change and are able to pivot, shift, etc. Or frankly, if we want to use that wonderful word innovation, who feel comfortable innovating, right? And then bubbling those things up. Okay. And I think that all the leaders I've worked with, my God, brilliant, brilliant people, but they're in the box running the business. They may not be as sensitive to some of the weak signals that might give them that early warning to some of these big changes. Or they perhaps are not investing in themselves with respect to some of the coaching that perhaps they probably need to sort of up level themselves to the next level. I think it's a very, very interesting thing. I think the decimation in most organizations of learning and development, okay, is meant sometimes we're hiring, to use your words, for the past as opposed to for what we want to become. Yeah, we need to know what we want to become, but I think that sometimes we're not investing enough in the organization and in the people to allow that flexibility to exist. So I'm agreeing with you, but just a different perspective, if that helps.
Yep, absolutely.
A theme we see a lot with our clients and in these topics, Randall, is the idea of partnerships and partners disagreeing. Talk to me about when partners disagree on the change that needs to be made. It can feel like gridlock, or sometimes no change at all can be very stressful on the organization. How can partners set up their working relationships and their respective responsibilities to avoid conflict so necessary change can roll out?
So I've worked with two different types of partnerships. The smaller partnerships, 2, 3, 4, 5, kind of small group, etc. And I've also worked with like global partnerships, global law firms, accounting consulting firms, etc. And so the mechanism for both of them is very different, right? So let me just take the smaller group. In this particular case, it's the question of saying, um, what's the decision-making matrix here? Is there one person who's a managing partner, or is it two completely equal 50-50 partners, which by the way is sometimes a recipe for disaster, because when there is dispute, then what's the mechanism to resolve the dispute? In that particular case, hey, listen, call me in. We've got a white paper about partner accountability and so on, and we can sort of work through kind of how to deal with that kind of thing. But also say that having disagreements is not bad. The power of partnerships means that people come to a particular problem from different perspectives, right? And so long as the end goal, there's some degree of alignment, having that positive disagreement, where that becomes a mechanism for an exploration of the true nature of the problem and therefore the potential solutions, isn't exactly a bad thing. Where it becomes a bad thing is when one feels that the way forward is to go this way and the way forward to go that way. Sometimes it means the partnership really needs to be split. Sometimes what you can say is, okay, listen, why don't we sort of grow another business line based on that changed assumption to make sure that gives it space, but meanwhile the mainline business can go as it should. At the very beginning, the publishing industry, actually, which is not a partnership, had that same kind of thing with ebooks, right? So we're going to set up a little ebook division, which is kind of like separate off the side. Same with newspapers, little e-publishing division, separate from the main thing. And once that sort of grew up, it sort of then became very, very much integrated and integral to the business as a whole, right? So putting it off almost as a skunk works, as a separate business, often gives it space to grow and prove or not prove without cannibalizing the core business. So sometimes that's the way to deal with change. Excuse me. With respect to the larger organizations, they can afford a little bit more, okay? And sometimes this is, let's have a committee to assign to work through this and come up with a recommendation, right? Because there's management structures and large partnerships to deal with that kind of thing. Sometimes it's a question of saying, well, we can underwrite, a bit of an entrepreneurial thing that we're going to put one partner in charge of growing this business sort of semi-independently to see where that goes, okay? Sometimes it's a question of saying, well, we got to do some mediation here, right? If we grow this practice, this one's going to suffer. We don't want to cannibalize, or we can't because of client conflict. So there's a little bit of more complexity with respect to resolving that particular thing. What I would say, though, is that there's a very, very powerful case to be made for coaching here. Because if there's coaching, sometimes it's not a question of one disagrees and we're at loggerheads and there's all kinds of really bad things that can happen. Maybe it's a question of one not having an opportunity to explore an issue in greater detail with somebody who's an outsider who might be able to give some perspective, right? And maybe that can help grow the argument, grow the idea, or maybe just let it go one way or the other. So when the conversations actually happen, everyone's a little bit more ready for those conversations. Sometimes the coach can be used to sort of, I don't want to say help mediate a conversation and play devil's advocate, okay, to both sides of a potential dispute, right? But there's definitely a role for a coach to help when that's going on. The problem is, unless you've actually been there and understand that kind of environment, it's very, very hard to do, right? Which is why, at least for me, it's fun. Ronnie, what other questions you got?
What I think's missing so far is talking about the carrot, as you say, and the stick, the consequences and incentives when it comes to change management and the plan. Like, talk to me about what would be like appropriate, good fit incentives. Or we had a client, for example, they were saying that they're incentivizing their clients, their employees or managers with bonuses. And one of the managers says, I don't want the bonus. I want something else. I want, let's bring the team to Hawaii and we can celebrate. I don't need the cash. I want the experiences, which we see a lot from, like younger generation of leaders. Can you talk to me about that, incentivizing change?
Yeah, I think the reason why we do a change is usually better to deliver on an organization strategy. That could be, higher profitability. It could be growing a particular market or geography, or it could be whatever it happens to be, right? So presumably, okay, the compensation and incentive structures that are in place should take care of the problem, okay, assuming that the objectives are set, etc., that are aligned as well. Unfortunately, that's not the case, because there's an incredible momentum with respect to compensation structures, particularly in large organizations. Everyone's in a band. We've done comp studies, for example, and here's the long-term compensation, and it's over 3 years, and the short-term compensation, and gee, we're going to give people some options, and because it becomes this fairly complex web of incentives, okay, it's harder to actually say, And how does implementing this change impact that? Well, in the long run, it'll have a big impact. But in the shorter, behavioral change, excuse me, sometimes, the question of comp plans is not as important as recognition plans. So for example, can you do a kickoff, right? What's involved in the kickoff? Okay, you can get a motivational speaker. Oh, that might be me. Okay, but whatever it is, okay, there's a kickoff. At a certain milestones, how are you celebrating the wins? How are you giving specific people a little bit of light? Okay, maybe I remember years ago when we were doing one particular change in the organization, we got everybody, the shirts, like nice shirts with the thing at the front. I know people don't do that as much nowadays, but how are you going to recognize achievement of milestones? And that becomes a mechanism to deal with the local time-bound kind of things. What are you going to do when the project is done and the excitement of it is over? Now we're back to the normal, etc. Well, how do you make it so there's no letdown afterwards? So I think that recognition rather than reward plays a huge part of it, because the recognition also provides an incentive and some visibility to everybody on the good that's actually happening. And so long as it's not always focused on, let's reward this one person, or recognize this one person, you're able to spread the love around, not in a everyone gets a trophy because everyone's on the team, but achieving certain things. I think that goes a long way from a carrot perspective. From a stick perspective, it's a little different thing, which is this. At a certain point, that bottom 10%, you've got to say, get with the program. Jack Welch famously said that every year, and there's some interesting dimensions to it, but famously said they're going to get rid of the bottom 10% of the organization and replace them with new hires, right? And it's certainly, it's very likely that of everyone who replaced, they're not going to be all in the bottom 10. There's going to be some stars and some good solid people in the middle. So at a certain point, we need to look at that 10% at the very bottom. And for people who don't get with the program, the question is there really a place for you here, right? Is there really a place for you? I'm not saying that you've got to fire people, etc., but there has to be there may have to be performance improvement programs. There may have to be some other things, in terms of their performance appraisal and salary impacts or bonus impacts, for example, for people who are truly frustrating the implementation of it at the point of near the very end of the change process. So that becomes a bit of a stick as well. So good question.
No questions for me, but good point around at some point you do have to say goodbye to people who are at cross purposes with where you're going to go. And sometimes releasing one individual in a group sends a good clear signal to everybody else that okay, there is something happening here, and I really need to figure out if I can do this or if I need to go on my own. Just to make sure that you're not embedding issues that are just going to haunt you down the road, or that you have these constant headwinds that are working against you.
And Leona, nowhere is this more problematic, because the theory of what you said and what I said is exactly right. But let's take a look at an organization, okay, a national organization who's got a star salesperson who blows through his or her quota every single month. Every quarter, the numbers are just incredible. But, they're really not kind of playing with the new CRM system that you've just implemented, right? They refuse to use it. So on one hand, okay, they're the star. On the other hand, they're not the star, right?
That's right. They're not being a good role model, and it's
No.
difficult. And in companies, so often they're going to protect revenue over sort of the overall strategy. But at some point, they just have to keep working with these individuals somehow or another, and really make it clear. Because what I've seen happen, and one client in particular, they have a real superstar at one location who regularly does not follow the processes and says, well, I don't have to, I can manage it. And they're continually having to go back to the person and say, well, okay, yes, you can manage it, but you know what, this isn't the process. And what's the message that you're sending to everybody else? What's the leadership? And, in that case, the person is kind of resistant. So they're going to have to keep working at it. And yet they can't afford to take any action because it's going to hurt their bottom line. I think businesses always get themselves caught this way. And so I think, what I've seen happen, and, I've seen this in terms of people, doing things that are really offside, where in investigations, it's very clear they should be exited. But unfortunately, the business is in business to stay in business. And, how do you build the fence around this little renegade and tolerate them, but make it clear to everybody else that, yeah, okay, I know that's what they're doing, but, my conversation is with you. And, when you're here and, when you can do we can discuss this differently, but, we have a plan to follow and kind of work with where you can. It's not easy. I mean, you're never going to get everybody 100% on board, but you do have to be a little bit strategic around what's the impact to the business.
Yeah.
You don't want to be on principle and then throw yourself underwater. I mean, that's not the point.
No, no. It's all great points, Leona. What I'd like to do is I'd like just to take a moment to say, from our perspective at the Brain Trust Professional Institute, what would that kind of change management process look like, and how do we actually touch all these different strata of the actual organization? And we sometimes forget about all the tools that are actually available for us to do it. And I'm not talking about the organization's newsletter and the one-on-one meetings or departmental meetings. I mean, that kind of, I think everybody understands, the email from the CEO to everybody. Okay, that I think we know of, but from my perspective, either leading or being involved in change, literally hundreds of times with like 100+ credible organizations. Here's an idea. Where does a keynote fit? Everybody's in the audience, whether it's customers, whether it's partners, whether it's members, whatever. There's one message that hopefully could motivate people and answer a bit of the why question, and how and what the step is to do. There's the coaching for the C-levels to sort of help them think through the before, during, and after. There's the monthly CPD that we can drip out. There's the self-paced leadership course. There's the retreats and everything. But with all those things, there's also a very interesting benefit that they feed into each other. If, for example, I've seen this many times, I'm coaching a CEO, and then after coaching the CEO, we're doing facilitation at a critical meeting or a retreat. Well, guess what? I know what's in the CEO's mind, and that comes about. If we're doing monthly CPD in the Q&A session, people are asking certain questions, that gets fed back to coaching. Well, gee, thank you very much. All of this coaching or the retreats or the monthly CPD, when you're preparing for a keynote, guess what? You know a lot more about the organization than just what happens to be on their website or an interview or two, right? And all of that can end up in a self-paced course as well. There's many ways that by doing a bunch of these things at the same time, they become critically important levers to successfully drive impact or change or growth within an organization. And sometimes we think, well, we're going to get a trainer in here to train on something or other. Then we're going to get a speaker to do a keynote at a session. Well, so-and-so is good for coaching. Okay, and as a result of that, we're missing this opportunity to get the synergistic effect and develop alignment in a far more coherent kind of way. And I think that's really what's personally exciting to me, because all of a sudden you see people, the light bulbs go on, the aha moment actually happens. So that's the key thought that I think I'd like to leave, that there's a lot more levers to successfully executing change or grow. There's a lot more levers to grow an organization or develop change than most people actually realize.
Thank you, Randall, for the conversation, and thank you to everyone who joined us and listened in. If any of the issues we talked about today resonate with you, if you're considering a change and want our perspective, if you're curious about business coaching, how to better align your team, or planning a leadership retreat, please reach out. Happy to have a conversation. If you'd like to get invites to these monthly live events and email us at info@randallcraig.com. You can book a call at www.randallcraig.net/30 or follow us on LinkedIn, and we shall keep in touch.